Are you considering adding a preamp to your Class D amplifier, but you're not sure if you should buy the Aiyima T1 Pro or the Fosi P3? Now, both promise stellar sound performance, but is there really that big of a sound difference between the two? Well, my name is Aaron, and I hope you stay tuned as we compare these two preamps' features, sound quality, and overall value to help you decide which preamp deserves a spot in your setup. Now, friendly reminder, a preamp is only used to connect sources and control volume and tone. It cannot power speakers like an amplifier similar to this Aiyima A70. The preamp connects to the amplifier by connecting RCA cables from the output on the preamp to the input on the amp, and then you plug your music source into the preamp's audio input. Let's first talk about how these preamps are similar to each other, and then I'll show you some of the differences between the two. And lastly, we'll try to determine if one will make your music sound better than the other. There are several similarities between these two preamps. First, they are both priced at just $80 each. Second, both have Bluetooth connectivity. They both have tone controls that you can use to adjust the treble and bass performance to your liking. They both have auxiliary outputs that you can use to connect a subwoofer. And it's important to note that neither of these preamps come with a remote control. Now, as much as these preamps look very similar, there are still some important differences to point out between the two. Even though both of these units have tubes and both preamps allow you to roll those tubes by substituting different models in each, their stock tubes actually differ, with the Aiyima coming with 6186 tubes and the Fosi P3 with the GE5654W tubes. Now, stay tuned because later in this video, I will mention these tubes and how they perform in terms of sound performance, and if one set actually sounds better than the other. Now, one thing to note is the Fosi P3 actually comes with a much more robust power supply, while the T1 Pro only uses a small wall wart. If you're interested in pairing one of these with headphones, only Fosi has a connection supporting headphones with impedance ranging from 16 ohms to 300 ohms, while the T1 Pro does not have a headphone connection at all. The T1 Pro has a direct mode, which basically means when it's turned off, you can adjust the treble and bass. And when direct mode is turned on, those knobs are bypassed for a direct audio signal to your amp, and the bass and treble knobs no longer work. Also, the T1 Pro has a 12-volt trigger, which means you can connect this to an amplifier with the same, like the Aiyima A70. And when you power on the preamp, it will automatically power the amp on as well. And lastly, for all those people out there that like swapping op amps in Class D products, it's important to note that the T1 Pro will allow you to swap those op amps. However, there's no ability to swap the op amps with the Fosi P3. So how do each of these sound, and does one sound better than the other? In order to answer this question, it's important to note that for me, the job of a preamp is not to color the sound in a negative way or degrade the sound by adding noise or distortion. I can happily report that neither of these units caused any of that noise or distortion, and that is most likely due to the tubes acting as buffers. What does that mean? It means that rather than providing a classic warm tube-like 3D holographic sound, the tubes in these preamps are acting as buffers instead and providing a cleaner sound overall. Now, people will disagree with me, but personally, I've never heard that big of a sound difference when changing the tubes or even comparing the tubes on these style of preamps, because again, they are using the tubes as buffers, and they're not being used in a design that adds a warm colored sound that you could try to determine if one sounds better than the other. Which means, in all honesty, that I can't actually say one of these preamps sounds better than the other. They both did their job by connecting a source and allowing me to dial in the sound signature via tone controls. So the good news is you don't really have to worry when choosing between the two that you might pick one that sounds worse than the other, which is always a relief. So since sound isn't a major important factor in trying to decide between these two, I think it's really going to come down to which features are most important to you and your setup. For instance, if a headphone output is important to you, then you will want to buy the Fosi instead of the Aiyima. If you like swapping op amps, you'll want to choose the Aiyima rather than the Fosi. If you like having a direct mode option so the audio signal skips the tone control features, again, you will want to choose the Aiyima instead of the Fosi. Lastly, if you are wanting to buy a preamp that you can connect to another amplifier via a 12-volt trigger, then you're going to want to go with the Aiyima instead of the Fosi. In short, you really can't go wrong with adding either of these preamps to your system. Just make sure you buy the one that meets your specific needs. Now, a couple times in this video, I've shown you the Aiyima A70 amplifier that was just recently released. If you'd like to learn more information about that A70, which would actually pair really well with the Aiyima T1 Pro that I showed in this video, you can learn more about that amplifier by watching this video here.